It is hard to find the first ever photo taken of the war. Seen on screen, this photo, taken in 1870, is considered to be one of the first photos of battle. Much earlier in 1847, this photo captures American troops riding into the city of Saltillo during conflict with Mexico. It takes a position as one of the earliest photos of war. The incredible thing about these photos is the patience and bravery of the photographers. Early cameras were large, heavy, it would be hard to move around and sometimes left you exposed during battle. Mathew Brady, the celebrated 19th century photographer, captured more than 10,000 images of the American Civil War. Similarly, Roger Fenton, a British photographer, took hundreds of photos of the Crimean War in the 1870s. While many consider these two men to be some of the earliest wartime photographers, they were actually not the first to capture conflict on film. A handful of pioneers had attempted it years before either man had sailed on the battlefield. Mathew Brady would then go on to craft a close relationship with Abraham Lincoln, taking these iconic photos which will be associated to his legacy forever. When talking about iconic war photographers, you need not look any further than Robert Capa. His work would redefine photojournalism, and he would be remembered as one of the greatest combat photographers in history. Born October 22nd, 1913 in Budapest, Austria-Hungary, he would flee political repression in Hungary as a teenager, ending up in Paris, where he met Greta Forel. Together they became photojournalists, working under the alias Robert Capa, an American name that would get their work recognized internationally. The two would go on to develop a romantic relationship, and Greta would go under her own alias, Greta Taro. They would publish their work separately. Capa's first taste of war was in Spain during the Spanish Civil War in 1936, alongside his companion Taro. Capa would leave this conflict without his partner after a motor vehicle she was on collided with an out-of-control tank. She had been returning from assignment covering the Battle of Brunete. However, he would also leave Spain with his photo named Death of the Loyalist Soldier, being on the front page of newspapers all over the world. The photo depicts a Republican soldier falling. Although the authenticity of this picture had been questioned, it would remain in the history books and remembered as one of the greatest pictures ever taken.
You see, this is a cagey question.
The soundbite you're about to hear now is one of the only recordings we have of Robert Capa, and he
when you shoot,
speaks about this
picture is the
photo.
same to you. And the prized picture is born in the imagination of editors and public who sees them. I had once one picture which was appreciated much more than the other ones, and I certainly did not know when I shot it that it was a especially good picture. It happened in Spain. It was very much at the beginning of my career as a photographer and very much at the beginning of the Spanish Civil War, when war was kind of romantic, if you can see anything like that.
No, I can't.
It was there because it was in Andalusia, and those people were very green. They were not soldiers, and they were dying every minute with great gestures, and they figured that was really for liberty and the right kind of...
He would go further to document 5 wars: the Spanish Civil War, the Second Sino-Japanese War, World War II across Europe, the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, and the First Indochina War. During World War II, Capa would be sent to the various parts of the European theatre as well as the North African theatre. On June 6, 1944, he would find himself on the beaches of Normandy, capturing the invasion. Capa was attached to the 16th Infantry Division on Omaha Beach. This beach in particular would be one of the heaviest defended and subsequently be the bloodiest. Capa would take 106 photos that morning. He would later discover that only 11 of the photos he took would survive the landings. This incident may have been because of his camera being waterlogged, but the more frequent allegation is that a young assistant accidentally destroyed the photos while they were being developed in the lab in London. Nevertheless, the photos that remain would go on to be known as the Magnificent 11, and would get Capa recognised all over once again. At 40 years old, Capa has stated he was done with the war. However, in 1954, Life magazine convinced him to go to Southeast Asia, where the French had been fighting since the end of World War II. The The regiment was passing through a road under heavy fire when Kappa got out of the jeep to take some photos ahead. He was stepped on a landmine a couple minutes later, resulting in his death. When looking at how much influence war correspondence has on conflicts, you can certainly see a trend. An American in the early 70s could see all of Vietnam on his television. Marshall McLuhan famously said, quote, "Television brought the brutality of war into the comfort of the living rooms. Vietnam was lost in the living rooms of America, not on the battlefields of Vietnam." At the peak of Vietnam, there were 600 accredited journalists for the US alone. More than 15% of these journalists were killed. A lot of the media produced by American journalists during this time could be used against the American military. During the Vietnam War, there were many protests on colleges and other campuses. I don't think it's far-fetched to think that the work of the war photographers generated this response. I've heard the Vietnam War be referred to as the first television war. I wonder what was the last. Looking at recent conflicts like Iraq and Afghanistan, you can see that they were heavily televised. In 2003, during the invasion of Iraq, US media coverage from cable networks would become the source of controversy after being accused of being pro-war biased. It was smaller independent photographers working for magazines that would show the war in its plain colours. The photos you're seeing were captured by Tim Hetherington, a British photojournalist who regularly contributed to Vanity Fair. Hetherington started as a trainee at Big Issue in London. He was their sole staff photographer. He would take photos of homeless shelters, demonstrations, dockers strikes, boxing gyms, celebrities, etc. He didn't like his celebrity assignments and preferred covering serious topics. He made several trips to Afghanistan in 2007 and 2008 with writer Sebastian Junger whilst working for Vanity Fair. They were embedded with a single US Army platoon serving at a remote outpost in Corinthia Valley. They filmed 2 documentaries in 2010, Respeto and Afghanistan, The Other War, which was broadcast on ABC's Newsnight programme. Some of my favourite work of Hetherington's falls within this collection of photos named Sleeping Soldiers. These photos captures the side of the war that people hadn't seen before. The soldiers are suddenly humanised in these photos. Hetherington had said that this is how the soldiers' mothers see them, and that's why he was fond of those photos. Hetherington's work in Afghanistan focused on the lives of these soldiers, not so much the conflict itself. Whilst in Misrata, Libya, a motor round would hit a group of journalists, killing both Hetherington and Hundros. It would also injure photographer Guy Martin and Michael Christopher Brown.
Excellent.
Anyway,
okay.
So, what was your role as a war correspondent, and what did you do?
Going back a little bit further, I joined the Royal Navy, ended up becoming a photographer through my choice. And then I made some decisions to be attached to deployed units, whether that be warships or later Royal Marines units. So spent since pretty much 2001 was the last part of my career onwards dealing with Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, etc., etc.
So if you were going to teach someone war photography, what kind of techniques would be?
Yeah, techniques-wise, the photography itself isn't much different to what you would have today as a wedding photographer. Sharpness, selective focus, composition, context of where they are, etc. But one of the things that you need to learn and you can't really train for is to ignore what is going on around you. If you ever go to a motorsport event, for instance, racing cars or bikes, when you hear the noise, you naturally look to where the noise is as to where the action is, for instance. Or if you're framing for a photograph and noises happen, you're not distracted by those noises, which in war can be quite catastrophic, but it is something that you need to sort of deal with.
Yeah, looking at the way war is changing, how do you think that's going to mean war photography changes as well?
Yeah, in my time, the invention of things like GoPros and quality cameras in smaller outfits, even like mobile phone technology, it does now mean that images taken during war can be taken by people that aren't naturally journalists or photographers by trade. So the quality may still be there in terms of their location when they take the pictures, but the quality in terms of how you use your camera skills to make the image stand out may be lost because you're not carrying lenses and cameras, you're carrying a little box that does it all for you.
I admire war photographers' ability to take photos under pressure and the artistic abilities they have to capture emotions of soldiers and civilians in such impactful ways. There are two things that photography doesn't cover: sound and smell. This is why it can be difficult for photographers to convey the full scale of battle. Yet with certain photographers, like the ones I have spoken about, they manage to I wanted to see if any of the techniques used by war photographers could be utilised in normal street photography. I took photos of the local town where there's lots of distractions around and it's hard to show things in their true colours